know?
Mm-hmm.
But then again, it's like, it's kind of like we were talking about Eeling yesterday, and I
Oh
don't know
yeah.
if you want to get into
No,
it,
I
but
definitely want to get into it. I was about to say, yeah.
yeah, Eeling, any sort of live bait, when you're fishing, you feel that tap. That initial tap is
Mm-hmm.
the fish opening its mouth like a vacuum and sucking it into its gullet. It's
Yes.
a very, very powerful and fluent motion. It's
Mm-hmm.
one motion.
Yep.
Now, if you hold on and you wait for that, because sometimes a fish will swallow something
Mm-hmm.
and then they'll do like a second one to get it down into the gullet.
Mm-hmm.
And if you fish live bait, you know what I'm talking about. That's why sometimes these fishermen who are fishing a larger bait, like a pogie or something,
Yep.
they will wait.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I even flip the entire bail. I have a lot of bait runners on this stuff that when I'm fishing live bait,
Oh, I
I'll
love
just
bait
flip the
runners.
bait runner, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll let them take it. They run for I give them maybe 5 yards.
Okay.
Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
That's way too much.
Yeah.
I shouldn't even say 5 yards. I
Yeah.
count to 5
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
before I'm
That's.
setting the hook.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If it's any longer than that, it gives that fish more time to suck down that big bait
Mm-hmm.
and literally get it into the gullet. And if you're fishing a J hook, if you're fishing a circle hook, no matter what, that
Mm-hmm.
fish will be gut hooked.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
with my smaller profile baits, like I fish within the estuaries, like a sand eel or a sandworm,
Yep.
I'm using this, a very thick little trout hook.
Mm-hmm.
And come schoolie season, those schoolies, they're finicky. They pick.
Yep.
You can feel them. Again, if I have a foot long worm,
Mm-hmm.
and I have a foot long fish, that fish is like chomping at the bit a little bit.
Yeah.
You can literally feel the what a nibble is and what a pull is.
Yeah.
If you're using braided line, you can feel when a fish farts on your line.
Yeah.
You know
Exactly.
what I mean?
Yeah.
They're right there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the guys that wait, those additional 2-3 seconds that allow that fish to really get that hook deep.
Mm-hmm.
And you end up gut hooking the fish.
Yeah. So my favorite story about me and my in fishing eels is when I learned, because again, I learned by watching videos on YouTube, reading about it in books and whatever. And so many people in videos and books and all over the internet say you want to bow to the cow,
Yes.
and 100% of the time, if you do that, if the fish is bigger than, I'm going to say 35 inches, eating your eel, it's going to be gut hooked. Even 35 inches, it will be gut hooked, regardless
Yes.
of what you're using. So, and I have a story here where I've told this before, I think maybe once, but I was fishing with an eel that I actually rigged. And I did that in the podcast too. And that eel, I measured it on the podcast. And I think it was something like 22 inches. So the eel is 22 inches long. It's huge.
I remember this
and
story.
It's about that thick around. It's ridiculous. I think it weighs like 1.5 pounds. And so I cast this thing out here. It's crazy. I'm like throwing a whole giant fish to catch another giant fish. And I'm reeling this thing in and I feel the taps of a fish on it. Now, in my mind, I'm like, this thing is so big, there's no way I can get, like, if I hook set too quickly, I'm just going to pull it out of the fish's mouth because this eel is huge. Right. And I gave it probably 3 feet. Like if my rod was straight up or at like a high angle, I gave it 3 feet of my rod, and then I hook set into this fish. Now, I ended up gut hooking that fish, and it was 45 inches. I was able to cut the line, release it. So who knows? It wasn't bleeding. But that just shows you when a fish can eat huge bait. That eel is enormous. And how easily it just sucks it into its mouth. That was 2 seconds. I gave it 2 seconds and it was already in its stomach.
Right. So think of any picture or even circumstance. Like if you've live rigged a mackerel, if you've live rigged a pogie, right?
Mm-hmm.
What part of the pogie is sticking out of the fish when you bring it in?
Exactly.
The tail. The
Yeah.
tail is sticking out every single time. So that what that tells me is these fish are attacking the head.
Oh
They're
yeah.
going and they're eating these fish from underneath, and they're attacking from the head, maybe mid-body forward.
For sure.
Right?
Yep.
So if we're fishing a 23-inch eel, we're reeling it in, and then all of a sudden, really slow.
Yeah.
Again, we're reeling it in slow. I mean, I don't know how you reel yours in, but
creeping.
Like as creeping, exactly, as slow as possible. And you're telling me that after that first bite, you're going to bow to the cow, give that fish like, what, 4 more seconds so you can start to feel it start to run and start to, suck that eel down again?
Mm-hmm.
If it was a big enough fish, you're not going to lose that fish. That fish is going to eat that eel in one gulp.
For sure.
Why would you be throwing a 23-inch eel if you weren't looking to catch a monster? You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. Yeah.
So and again, it's the same with eels. Dude, even the smallest profile bait, when I'm catching my sand eels, I hook them through the eye, and I just pop them. And it's like, the way that the eels are located within the gullet or whatever, it's always head first, man. And and I don't again, could it be because we're hooking them in the head? I don't know.
No, actually, I do know this one. Ready?
Yeah, please give me some perspective, because this is all speculation.
So if you think about it, I got my little my double jointed bunker plug here for
love it
the film. When the fish is eating a bait, if it goes this way, it has to fight the spines of the fish. It has to fight the scales of the fish, because everything's pointed that way, so it can be streamlined going through the water. A lot of fish, like even mackerel, have pretty sharp spines, and the bass doesn't want to be fighting against the tail of the fish and everything to swallow it. And if it eats it this way, it's easy for it to slide down into its stomach. Because the striped bass doesn't chew bait because they don't have teeth, so they do crush bait. They have a big hard like spiny plate in the back of their throat, detriment to my hands multiple times. I've tried, like, if eeling, and this is the thing, like, you give the bass even a few seconds, it's gonna the hook will be deep in its throat. It might not be in its stomach, and that won't hurt the fish, but it's going to be pretty far back there. And I've had to reach in and unhook a fish, and they'll crush your hand. And they have these big like plates, and they'll crush it. And so you got to be careful unhooking giant fish too. But the point is, like, the bass is going to eat it head first, and it's not like a fish is not going to be playing with its food. It thinks its food's going to get away from it. So it like genetically needs to eat that thing as fast as possible.
Right. And listen, man, that I completely agree. And just thinking of how bass feed, like, again, if you're a fish and you're hiding behind a rock, you're deep down in this water, and you see this eel swimming, they're looking up. They're looking up. Think about the best conditions. We got full moon conditions, you know what I'm saying? And we have now this like nice eel with all this light projected down from the moon. And now this fish is looking up. Like, that fish can see that eel clear as day.
Exactly.
It knows how it's going to attack it. You're reeling it in at, negative speed. That fish has all the time in the world to get that.
Yes.
Where versus a pencil popper, you're dancing that thing on the top of the water, and you got that trailer hook that ends up catching the fish. Like, think of how fast you're popping it. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
The fish is chasing that bait. Versus you're fishing a live bait now. You're creeping it along. You're popping it off muscle beds. You're letting it drift. However you're fishing it.
Yep.
The fish has time. They make a decision.
Yeah.
And if we give them too much time,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to get more gut hooks. It's just going to happen.
Yeah, for sure.
So
And
yeah.
that's what happens. I mean, and I thought, you know, when I first started out and I kept getting these fish hooked deep, and I was like, I don't want to fish with eels if I'm going to kill every single fish that I hook, you know?
Right.
So then I started fishing them more as I kind of put it as like I would fish soft plastic. I would wait half a second when I feel that hit. When you're fishing with soft plastic for like schoolie bass, for example, for those of you that are listening, what I like to do is I twitch it or whatever, and then when I see the bass eat it, I don't pull it really quick because sometimes they don't get a chance to really get it in their mouth when they're small. So you want to pause for half a second and then you hook into them, and then it's all fine and they're not hooked deep or whatever. But when you're fishing with a live eel, I kind of treat it the same way. As soon as I feel those taps, I wait half a second. Generally, I'm still reeling, and as soon as I feel that pressure, like I'll feel the tap, and then I'll feel the pressure, and I'll hook set.
Right. And honestly, man, like we're all human. We're not crazy in tune with, you know, when the bass hits and we're gonna jerk immediately.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
you usually, you know, you're cranking in your bait or whatever. You feel the weight of the fish, and then you're set. You know, if you wait 3-4 seconds, again, the way I fish eels is there's like a very deep channel, and I'll cast to the other side of the channel where basically my eel is being carried out by the rip. It's being pulled.
This is something I really want to talk about.
Again, what's that?
I really wanted to talk about this because we fished eels in very different locations.
Yes,
and this is really
again,
cool
when we were talking yesterday, you were like, "Oh, it's like you were taking it back."
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll throw over the rip to where there's like more calm water, and I'll throw on my bait runner, right? And I'm just letting a little bit of line out. This allows my bait to be carried in that rip. Just a little bit outside it on an embankment, and I'm letting more line out. It's going to let me cover more distance, right?
Okay, yeah.
So it's being carried over structure. It's being carried over, you know, sandbars. Maybe I let 100 yards, maybe 200 yards, 250 yards of line go out, and then I start my slow retrieve. I wait for it to get to the end of the rip because there are fish waiting in the end of that rip, just sitting in that kind of calmer water where the you know the river sort of it's a river mouth. But where that river feeds out, you know, that current kind of dies at some point, or it's less you know, less strong just because it's not going through this small channel. It's going into the open ocean. So there are fish that sit at that very end of it, waiting for the bait fish that cannot, you know, get to that area or can't swim up current and so forth. So I just wait for my eel to trickle, goes over structure, goes over whatever. Maybe I'm doing like a few slow cranks.
Yeah, just keep contact.
Yeah, it gets to the end, and now I'm working it not against the current, but again, just along a seam that's very similar to the seam on the other side of the channel I was just throwing. Like light water, not moving a ton, but still movement. It's along an embankment where we have this deep channel and we have this kind of nice sandy shelf. And now I'm slowly cranking it back. Most of the time, I get hit at the end of the channel. I get hit at the very, very end. But there are times that I'm retrieving it and just that eel working along the top, or if I'm fishing really, really heavy current, somewhat along the bottom or deeper, you know, that's where I'm going to get the strike.
And that goes back to when you're talking about how striped bass like to they're kind of lazy fish. They like to set up in places that they don't have to work very hard for.
Absolutely. Like a lot of guys, and God, I shouldn't say it's funny, but you know, educate yourself a little bit. Watch a YouTube video. There's so much knowledge out there. Like I see these guys throwing, you know, chunk bait into this raging water.
Yeah.
And it's like, if that bait's not moving along the bottom of the water, like along the bottom of the channel, like, you're not going to catch a fish.
Yeah.
Like, why? Unless a fish is actively moving through there and feeding,
yeah,
you're not catching that fish. Like,
yeah,
you are
for sure.
sitting and playing a waiting game, and you're restricting your catchability, if you will, to this one small tiny window right out in front of you.
Exactly.
If you let that bait bounce, you're more likely to go by a rock structure, and you're more likely to go by, some sort of structure that's holding a fish that's waiting. It's just waiting, because that fish is not going to be in that channel unless there's something big that it can get behind, that it can literally just allow. Can you hear my dog in the background?
No, it's fine. Yeah, no.
Okay.
You're good.
Hey, buddy. It's okay. Come here. My wife left, so he's sad. But yeah, basically, if there's no sort of structure, the fish aren't going to be in that current. Where are they going to be? They're going to be at the end of the current.
Oh yeah.
Where there's less. Think about it, man. If there's a piece of pizza that's at the top of a mountain versus a piece of pizza that's at the foot of the mountain, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
You're going to get the one at the foot because it's easier, You're not going to work harder, and especially if you're starving, you're not going to go expend more calories hiking to the top of the mountain to get a piece of pizza. Like, fish don't have bragging rights for working harder. You know what I mean?
True.
It's one of those things, especially with eels, dude. Like, I've heard stories, and my buddies have sent me pictures where there's literally a pokey tail sticking out of this fish's mouth, and he caught that fish on a live eel.
Yeah. That's why I love fishing live eels, because I know it's such a confidence bait for me, because I know that if there's a big fish that moves through that area at all, it's more than likely going to eat that eel, regardless of how full it is or how hungry it is.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Eel. I use pizza kind of as an analogy, because it's like, you could have had dinner 10 minutes ago, and then a large cheese pie comes to your house, and you're like, I can eat a slice. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
No one's saying no to that.
Very, very true. Yeah. And that's eeling is such a cool thing to me, because an eel, if you could create the perfect, eels are contrary to popular belief. Some people say they can't keep eels alive. I don't know how that's possible, because I've seen eels literally, because I have a tank out, I keep eels in a tank. What I'll do around a moon phase, and I talked about this literally in the podcast I posted the other day, I'll buy 25 eels, and I'll keep them in the tank throughout the 6 days around the moon phases, the full and the new moon. And eels, I don't know if you know this, I don't know if you do something similar to this, but eels are so good at escaping. I don't know if you've had an experience. Eels can escape
from humans, because yes, they're slimy and
no, they'll find their way out of a terrarium tank. I put them in a fish tank.
Oh, really?
They're so good at escaping out of things. It's extraordinary. I've talked to guys at tackle stores. A lot of my buddies keep the water super low in their tanks because of that. It's funny you say that. And so I literally, what I do is I have a tank, a 10-gallon tank, and I put a 10-gallon filter going just to keep the water circulating. I don't really have a filter in there. I just have the water circulating, and I'll change the water every other day, and the eels are perfectly fine. But my point is, I've had eels climb out of the tank there, slither onto my driveway in 80-degree weather, black pavement, and I found them 4 hours later. They're completely dried out, and I put them back in the tank, and they rehydrated and swam away in the tank.
Wow.
And I used them that night, and I literally had one eel that there's wasps eating on the driveway, and I caught a fish, a really large fish on it that night. The same
That's
eel.
Awesome.
So eels are
That's a good story.
ridiculous. You
No,
couldn't
I I
get a
agree.
better thing.
For the people who say that they can't keep them alive, that's
Yeah.
sort of strange to me. What I tend to do, like if I'm props to you for the water tank and everything. I'm
Yeah.
not that into it, but sometimes I'll fill a 5 gallon bucket and I'll change the water out every once in a while.
Yeah.
Um, but most of the time, what I'm doing is I have my eels in a plastic bag. That's how I get them when I buy them,
Mm-hmm.
and I fill a 5 gallon bucket with like a little bit of ice towards the bottom.
Yeah.
And all I'll do is I'll poke some holes in the bottom of the plastic bag and just open it up over the top of the
That's really smart. Yeah.
of the 5 gallon bucket. And
Mm-hmm.
that way, they have fresh oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
Their slime is draining out into the ice.
Yep.
They're kind of kept in a paralytic state
Mm-hmm.
where they're manageable. But like
Mm-hmm.
if I'm gonna go fishing with them, they're going in a mesh. I have a mesh bag that I tie to my wader belt. And
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I'll use that. Or I'll, like, if I'm really fishing for an extended period of time, I'll even put the eel bag in the water, since it is mesh, and
Mm-hmm.
I'll put a rock over the top of it so that they stay somewhat calm, cool, and collected.
Yeah.
Or lively, if you will.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, the eels are as much of a pain in the ass as they are to deal with.
Yeah.
They're just producers, man. You
I know.
can't argue with it. I've had sand eels that I had in my bathing suit pocket, and I fished with them all day, and the next thing I know, my bathing suit smells like absolute like garbage, horrendous. You don't even want to be near me, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, but that's what catches those fish. And that,
for sure.
If I didn't have anything to hold it, I'd stick them in my pocket again. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know, because they just produce fish. And if you're out there and you have a spot and you can consistently catch schoolie sized bass out of it, get yourself eels, and fish that around a moon phase with your favorite tide or wind or whatever with eels. And more than likely you'll at least get a bass that's in that mid to high 30-inch range most of the time. And I kind of category a fish under, even I guess fish up to like 40 inches, I'd category more on that schoolie sized fish. Those fish that will follow around and be in the mix of bass that are like 20 inches. When you get a little over 40 inches and you get into those bass that are like 30, like, I don't know, 45 inches, even up to 50 inches, I guess, those fish are going to be most of the time by themselves, or maybe with one or two other fish of similar size.
Right.
And so realistically, there's spots that produce, or that there's spots that hold much larger fish just because of the bait that's around. And I talk a lot about how you want to fish where I try to fish where I know there's big bunker schools offshore. One of my like best producing spots, consistently every single day, you can go offshore 400 yards and there's giant bunker schools all year. At least last year, that's what happened. Huge bunker schools. And people on the bunker schools were having a very hard time catching bass. But at night, all of those fish that were underneath those bunker schools that were eating as much bunker as they could would come into the rocks at night, and that's when I'd be actually ending up catching them. And when you talk about fishing in Maine, and Eeling in Maine, and we have very, now they're pretty similar when you get into the rocky areas, but when you're fishing in an estuary or in a river, what is your like line, leader, and like hook that you use? Because this is something that I get so many questions about.
Dude, you're gonna laugh, because when I first started, going for these larger fish, I reached out to my buddy, and he's like, "Hey man, you need an 11-foot pole, you need 60-pound braid, you need 60 to 80-pound mono." I'm like, what?
Yeah.
And he's telling me about these reels and specifics. He's like, your drag has to be pinned. I'm like, okay, I'm fishing in this little tiny body of water with a 7-foot pole, with literally 15-pound mono at the end of my, at the end of my leader. I'm using a 15-pound leader.
Yeah.
And dude, I never even looked up the poundage of, my swivels and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fishing a 1 ounce weight.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just because, like, where are the fish going to go? You know what I mean?
In an estuary, yeah.
In an estuary, or even in a sandy bottom, there are some nice areas I can show you up in Maine where they just hold fish. And when you hook into that fish, where is it going to go?
Yeah, straight out.
It's just going to go straight out or to the left or to the right. Like, I am more concerned about my line wrapping around a swimmer's leg than getting hooked, getting wrapped around a rock or any sort of structure.
Yeah.
So my transition, I use like a little, maybe a 7.5 foot medium heavy, 6 gill. It's a freshwater rod, and I have like a Spinfisher 5 on it by Penn.
Love Penn reels.
Oh, Penn's great. But again, dude, I'm using my mono, or my braid is probably, I could get away with 20-pound braid, to be honest.
Oh, I'll tell you a story after this, but yeah.
Yeah, I fish 30-pound braid just because, I fish mussel beds. I fish, stuff where my hook or my bait tends to get locked up and I don't want to lose my gear. So most of the time I'm pulling back. Have there been times where I've fished 30-pound mono? Absolutely. Do I feel like the hookup rate is less or more with the pound line I'm using? No. People are like, visibility is a big thing. I'm like, okay, is
That's
it
my favorite
really
thing
though? Because my
people say.
tactical angler clip is larger than my hook most of the time, and I'll catch 40 fish standing next to you who's not using the right bait and not presenting things right, and I'll run circles around you all day.
Yeah, exactly.
So, again, you talk to each fisherman and they'll have little nuances that works for them and so forth. It could be, a lot of the stuff is like circumstantial or specific to a certain area. So again, like, I was fishing low profile, like minimum visibility stuff before I started getting into these big fish. And now, my buddy's telling me to throw this, this giant wooden stick bait that doesn't even look like a fish to me. And I'm like, these fish, my whole life I've fished based off of presentation and making my eel look like it was alive, or making my worm look like it was alive, presenting the fish with what they're seeing. Yeah. Rather than this Danny plug that is the most like visually disgusting thing I've ever seen. But that it taught me to appreciate swim patterns and stuff, because you're looking at that Danny plug and how it works and the wobble and stuff and the wake it creates behind it, if it's not a deep diving Danny. And like, it changed my whole way of fishing and my whole mindset on presentation. So I'm happy you asked that.
Yeah. And it's funny. So the one seminar that I've ever gone to, the guy was talking about eeling in estuaries, and he was using 11 to 15-pound braid.
Yeah.
And he was catching 50-pound bass on this.
Yeah.
And that's an estuary. And you should have seen my face when he was saying this, because coming from me, like fishing out on the rocks, I'm like, I wouldn't catch a schoolie with 15-pound braid in the rocks.
That's what I'm saying. It's all based on where you fish.
Exactly.
Like, why do we have, that's half my rod collection back there. You know what I mean? Why do we have different rods? It's for different fishing conditions and different fishing scenarios.
Exactly.